The air in the abandoned asylum corridor was thick, with the scent of damp decay and something metallic, like old blood on rusted metal. A sticky, cold moisture clung to the walls, making the brickwork glisten under the flickering emergency lights that shouldn't have had power for decades. From somewhere deep in the building came a sound that defied explanation. Not a scratch or a whisper, but a low, rhythmic pulsing that seemed to vibrate through the floor itself. Then came the smell of ozone, sharp and electric, cutting through the rot. The unmistakable scent of something being torn open between worlds. The security guard froze, his muscles locking as a primal dread took hold, his mind screaming to run while his body refused to obey. Through the warping air, shapes began to form. Not shadows, but negative spaces where reality simply ceased to exist, geometric patterns that hurt to look at. And then, from within that impossible geometry, something reached through, not a hand, but a concept given form, a thing that existed in angles that shouldn't exist in our dimension. This is what Officer Daniels witnessed on his final patrol. Not a ghost or a monster, but a violation of reality itself, a tear in the fabric of what we know to be possible. Imagine standing on the banks of the Ohio River, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and rust from the Silver Bridge groaning in the distance. Then, from the tree line, a sound like tearing sheet metal mixed with a hawk's cry, a shriek that seemed to vibrate in your very bones. Your muscles lock. Not from cold, but from a sudden, overwhelming certainty that something ancient and malevolent had just fixed its gaze upon you. That certainty, a deep-seated dread you couldn't shake, would be proven horrifically true months later, when headlines screamed of tragedy. 46 souls lost in an instant, as the bridge gave way into the icy December waters. And in the minds of the townsfolk, a haunting question took root. Was it merely structural failure, or had the winged omen they'd seen been a warning all along? The air in Point Pleasant grew thick, carrying the scent of damp earth and the faint, metallic tang of the Ohio River at night. Then came the first sighting. Not a sound, but a sudden, oppressive pressure, like the atmosphere itself had turned to cold, wet wool against the skin. The creature was a silhouette against the sky, its form blotting out the stars, with two immense, leathery wings that seemed to absorb the faint moonlight. Witnesses described its eyes not as seeing, but as knowing. Two burning, crimson coals that fixed on you with an intelligence that felt ancient and utterly alien. A low, subsonic hum vibrated in the chest. A sound felt more than heard, making the teeth ache and the stomach clench with a deep-seated, instinctive terror. This wasn't a random monster. Its appearances were preceded by a sickly sweet odor of ozone and decay, and followed by a whispering dread that lingered for days. Those who locked eyes with it felt their thoughts scatter, replaced by a single, icy clear warning that bypassed language and spoke directly to the primal brain. It was an omen made flesh, a living shadow whose very presence seemed to warp the air, leaving behind a sticky residue of fear and a certainty of impending doom. The Silver Bridge looms over the Ohio River, its steel beams catching the last light of dusk, casting long, skeletal shadows across the water. A faint, metallic scent of river water and rust hangs in the air, carried on a breeze that feels unnaturally cold against the skin. From the town below, the distant hum of engines and occasional laughter drift upward, sounds that feel strangely thin and far away. The pavement is damp with evening dew, leaving a sticky residue on shoes that seems to cling with unusual persistence. Every familiar face carries a hidden tension in their eyes, a subtle tightening around the mouth that speaks of unshared thoughts. There's a palpable weight to the evening air here, thick with secrets that settle in the hollow spaces between buildings. The river flows with a low, constant murmur that seems to carry whispers just below the threshold of hearing. The old TNT area stretched before them, a graveyard of concrete bunkers, their rusted doors hanging open like slack jaws in the moonlight. A faint, metallic scent of old rust and damp earth carried on the breeze, sticking to the back of their throats with each inhale. Steve cut the engine, and the sudden quiet felt thick, broken only by the distant drip of water seeping through cracks in the bunkers. Linda shifted in her seat, the vinyl upholstery cold and sticky against her skin, as if the chill of the place had already seeped inside. Somewhere in the darkness, a faint scratching sound echoed, not animal, but deliberate, like metal dragging slowly across concrete. Roger's breath hitched. The air grew heavy with a creeping dread that whispered this was no ordinary abandoned place. The car idled in that secluded lover's lane, its engine a low hum against the chorus of crickets in the surrounding woods. Inside, the warmth of the cab held the faint scent of old vinyl and cheap air freshener, a bubble of normalcy in the encroaching dark. Their conversation was easy, punctuated by soft laughter that felt suddenly fragile in the vast quiet of the trees. Then Roger turned the wheel, and the headlight beams swept across the clearing. The light didn't penetrate the shadows around one structure. It merely outlined a tall, impossibly still shape leaning against the cold concrete. The laughter died in their throats, replaced by a sharp, shared intake of breath. A metallic scent, like old rain on rusted iron, seemed to seep through the car's vents. In the new silence, they heard it. A faint, wet scratching sound, like nails slowly dragging down the concrete wall. The initial assumption was that it was a man, but that impression shattered almost immediately. Its height was the first true aberration, stretching to an impossible 7 feet, its form a stark, vertical shadow against the murky twilight. The air itself seemed to thicken and grow cold, carrying a faint, metallic scent like old iron and a deeper, earthy smell of damp soil and rot. It was utterly motionless, a statue carved from the gathering darkness, its stillness more menacing than any movement could have been. Then, with a slow, grinding inevitability that seemed to pull at the very fabric of the scene, it began to turn. A low, wet, scraping sound accompanied the motion, like stone dragging over stone, and a wave of primal dread, cold and heavy, locked the observer's limbs in place. From its back unfolded 2 gigantic wings, like a monstrous moth, each membrane stretched taut over skeletal frames that seemed to absorb the faint moonlight. A faint, papery rustle accompanied their movement, the sound of ancient parchment being slowly torn, while the air grew thick with the scent of damp earth and something metallic, like old copper. In the center of its shadowy head, 2 massive, circular eyes that glowed with a fierce, infernal red, like banked coals in a pitch-black forge. They emitted no heat, but a static charge made the fine hairs on the observer's arms stand erect, and the low electrical hum seemed to vibrate directly in the teeth. It didn't move, an impossible statue of shadow and malevolent light, its utter stillness more terrifying than any sudden lunge. The observer's breath hitched, trapped in his chest, a primal dread taking hold as he realized it was not looking at the forest, but directly through the darkness. At him. The crimson orbs pierced the darkness, their gaze locking with Roger's through the grimy windshield as if they recognized him personally. A metallic tang filled the car's interior, sharp and coppery like the scent before a storm, while the windshield wipers struggled against the grime. Roger's knuckles turned bone white on the steering wheel, his joints aching with the tension of holding perfectly still against the overwhelming instinct to flee. Then, pure animal terror obliterated all thought, flooding his system with adrenaline that made his vision tunnel and his ears ring. He slammed the gearshift into reverse with a violent clunk that echoed through the vehicle's frame, the sound unnaturally loud in the tense quiet. Gravel erupted in a spray of stone and dust as the tires spun desperately, seeking traction on the loose surface while those red eyes remained fixed in the darkness. As they peeled onto the main road, he glanced in the rearview mirror, his breath hitched, catching painfully in his throat as his eyes locked onto the reflection. It wasn't on the road behind them. The creature was in the air, a dark silhouette against the bruised purple of the night sky. Not flying with wings or motion, but hanging there, impossibly, as if the very air had solidified to hold it. A sickly, metallic smell, like ozone and old blood, seeped through the car's vents, making the air thick and hard to breathe, and it was keeping pace. 60, then 70 miles per hour, the thing matched their speed without effort, its hollow gaze fixed on the back of his head. The steering wheel grew slick and cold under his palms, a clammy dread rooting him to the seat. Every instinct screamed to floor the accelerator, but a deeper, primal fear whispered that speed was meaningless to whatever hung in the darkness outside. The red eyes remained, 2 smoldering embers piercing the night from just beyond the window pane. A low, guttural rasp, like stone grinding on stone, began to vibrate through the wall. The air in the room grew thick and metallic, carrying the sharp scent of ozone and something faintly coppery. Then came the first clipping, a grainy photo under the stark headline, "Winged Monster, reported in local woods." More followed in a frantic cascade, each a fragment of the same impossible story from different towns, different years. The dates told the true horror. This wasn't an isolated incident, but a pattern, a trail of fear stretching back decades. The official police logs documented each sighting with clinical detachment, but between the lines, you could almost smell the tang of ozone that witnesses described lingering in the air after each encounter. Crude, frantic sketches, smudged by nervous fingers, depicted not a bird, but something with tattered, membranous wings and a disturbingly humanoid silhouette, as if the artist's hand was shaking from a deep, visceral unease. The responding officers dismissed the reports outright, attributing them to a trick of the light or collective panic, their skepticism a thin veil over a growing, unspoken tension at the precinct. Witnesses, however, spoke of a low, papery rustling that seemed to stick to their skin, a sound that didn't fade but clung to the quiet like a damp, cold cloth. The idea of a giant bird was a safe, logical box they tried to force the phenomenon into, but the details, the silent glide, the absence of feathers, the feeling of being watched by something ancient and alien, refused to fit. This wasn't mass hysteria. It was a slow, creeping realization that the rules of the world they knew had a crack, and through it, something utterly other was beginning to seep. But the reports didn't stop. They multiplied. John Alvis was driving home from his shift when something landed on the roof of his truck with a heavy thud. The impact rattled the entire vehicle, shaking the steering wheel in his hands as the cab filled with the sharp scent of ozone and hot metal. He saw leathery wings wrap around his windshield, blotting out the world. The wings pressed against the glass with a sticky, wet sound, leaving smears of something dark and viscous as they shifted position. John's breath hitched in his throat, his mind racing through impossible explanations while a primal dread took hold in his gut. The air inside the cab grew heavy and cold, carrying the faint odor of damp earth and something metallic, like old blood on wet stone. He could hear a low, guttural rasp from just beyond the glass, a sound that seemed to vibrate through the truck's frame and into his bones. The engine died. It wasn't a sputter or a cough. It was an abrupt, total cessation, as if the machine's very soul had been ripped from its metal frame. The radio screamed with static. A wave of white noise, harsh and metallic, filled the cab, drowning out the night and vibrating through the steering wheel. And then it was gone. The static vanished into an absolute void, leaving behind a thick, oppressive quiet that seemed to swallow sound itself. A strange, acrid scent, like ozone after a lightning strike, tinged with something earthy and decayed, crept into the air. The driver's fingers, still on the key, felt the metal grow unnaturally cold and damp, as if coated in a thin film of condensation from nowhere. Somewhere in the distance, a faint, rhythmic scratching echoed, like claws dragging slowly over gravel, followed by a whisper so low it was felt more than heard. Paralyzed by the unknown, a primal dread took hold, freezing his lungs and locking his joints in place. The truck started right up. With a smooth, normal purr, the engine roared to life. The headlights blazed on, and the radio clicked to a clear, cheerful station, as if nothing had ever happened. Then, the sightings changed. It wasn't just appearing anymore, it was communicating. The air inside the cab grew thick and metallic, like the smell of a storm that never breaks. A low, rhythmic scratching began on the roof, each scrape methodical and deliberate, like claws testing the metal. His knuckles turned bone white on the steering wheel, a cold, clammy sweat making his palms slip on the leather. Then, a voice, if you could call it that, seeped through the glass. A wet, guttural whisper that seemed to form inside his own skull. It wasn't a language he knew, but the meaning was clear. A primal, territorial claim that rooted him to the seat with a dread he'd never felt before. Paul's eyes snapped open to find a towering, ink-black silhouette looming at the foot of his bed. A form so dense it seemed to swallow the moonlight filtering through the blinds. Then, a voice cut through the dark. A rasping, metallic scrape, like rusted gears grinding against stone, utterly devoid of warmth or breath. It uttered just 7 words. "You have a problem. Your watch is broken." Each syllable landed with a dry, mechanical precision that felt alien in the quiet room. Paul's gaze dropped to his wrist. His reliable watch, which had ticked faithfully through countless shifts, now sat motionless. White's hands frozen at a stark, unnatural angle. A sudden, acrid scent, like ozone after a lightning strike, filled the air, sharp and electric, making the hairs on his arms prickle. His breath hitched in his throat, the weight of the encounter pressing down like a physical force, as the figure simply vanished, leaving only the stopped watch and that lingering, metallic smell. The psychic dread didn't just haunt their minds, it invaded their senses. They smelled ozone, sharp and metallic, as if the air itself had been scorched by lightning. Their skin prickled with a cold, damp sensation, like being touched by unseen fingers in a misty graveyard. In the quiet, they heard a faint, rhythmic scratching, like nails dragging slowly across old wood. This wasn't mere fear. It was a crushing, existential weight, as if the universe itself had turned hostile. Their breath hitched, each inhalation tasting of iron and decay, a reminder of mortality they couldn't escape. It left them hollow, certain that some vast, indifferent doom was now irrevocably aware of them. Point Pleasant was no longer just haunted. It was being given a countdown. Local journalist Mary Heyer and out-of-town investigator John Keel started connecting the dots. The Mothman sightings were the center of a web of strangeness. Men in black began visiting witnesses, their faces expressionless, their suits impossibly dark. Mysterious phone calls crackled with garbled, metallic voices that seemed to speak from a great distance. UFO reports lit up the sky. Silent, impossible crafts that moved in ways physics could not explain. The flying saucer sketch wasn't just a drawing. It was a raw, jagged scar across the town's collective memory, sketched in frantic charcoal on yellowed paper by a hand that trembled with genuine terror. Its impossible geometry seemed to bleed off the page, a stark, black and white warning of something that defied the very physics of our world, leaving a lingering scent of ozone and scorched metal in the air. The shadowy figure in the black suit was more than just a man. It was an absence of light, a walking silhouette that seemed to absorb the very warmth from the rooms it entered, its presence announced only by a faint, dry rustle of fabric. It moved with an unnatural, liquid silence, leaving behind a palpable cold spot and the faint, cloying smell of damp wool and something chemical, like old film or formaldehyde. And the spinning phone dial. That wasn't just a sound, it was a mechanical heartbeat, a relentless, whirring, click, click, click that drilled into the skull, promising a connection to a voice that could not exist. With every revolution, the air in the room grew heavier, thick with static, and the metallic taste of fear, as the listener waited, breath held, for the line to pick up on the other end of oblivion. December 15th, 1967. A cold, dusky evening settled over the town like a suffocating blanket. The air grew thick and metallic, carrying the sharp, clean scent of ozone that crackled with static electricity. From the abandoned textile mill at the edge of town, a low, guttural hum began to resonate through the frozen ground. It was a vibration more than a sound, a deep-seated tremor that made the window panes in every home rattle in their frames. The primal dread that had been simmering beneath the town's surface for weeks finally boiled over, paralyzing everyone where they stood. They didn't have to wait long. The other shoe was about to drop with a force that would shatter their world forever. December 15th, 1967, 5:04 p.m. The Silver Bridge, packed with cars heading home for the holidays, shuddered under the weight. The structure groaned, a deep, metallic whine that vibrated through the steel like a dying beast. Inside their cars, drivers felt the tremor through their seats, a jarring lurch that rattled coffee cups and silenced Christmas carols on the radio. The air grew heavy, thick with the smell of cold exhaust, old snow, and the sharp, coppery scent of fear sweat. For a heartbeat, everything hung in a suspended, breathless quiet. The only sound, the distant, mournful cry of a train whistle from the riverbank below. Then, with a sound like the world tearing apart, a catastrophic shriek of rending iron and snapping cables, the equilibrium shattered. The dark, winged shape didn't just appear. It erupted from the river, a silhouette of impossible scale tearing through the mist like a bullet from the deep. The sound that followed wasn't a distant boom. It was a visceral, concussive blast that struck the chest like a physical blow, rattling teeth and shaking the very ground beneath their feet. In its wake, the air grew thick and metallic, carrying the sharp tang of ozone mixed with the faint, unsettling odor of wet earth and something older, something long buried. Witnesses stood frozen, not by cold, but by a sudden, gut-deep understanding that the rules of their world had just been violently rewritten. The silence that rushed in after the blast wasn't empty. It was a heavy, listening quiet, broken only by the frantic, shallow gasps of those trying to process what their eyes had just delivered to their unwilling minds. This was no longer a story whispered in the woods. This was a declaration, carved into the night with sound and shadow, and the message was terrifyingly clear. The single eye bar, a crucial component holding the aging bridge together, snapped with a sound like a gunshot in the cold air. The entire structure groaned, a deep, resonant vibration you could feel in your teeth as the bridge began to twist against its own weight. In less than a minute, with a deafening metallic screech that tore through the valley, the bridge folded inward, a monumental collapse of engineering. It fell like a house of cards, a chaotic symphony of twisting steel and shattering concrete plunging toward the water below. It struck the freezing, black water with a horrendous, concussive splash that sent a shockwave across the surface. The air grew heavy with the smell of wet rust and river mud, a cold, damp finality settling over the scene. 46 people, their journeys abruptly severed, never made it home that night. The river's surface grew still once more, holding its terrible secret in the profound quiet that followed the cataclysm. In the immediate aftermath of the Silver Bridge collapse, a profound, unnatural stillness descended upon Point Pleasant. The frantic shouts of rescuers and the groaning of twisted metal faded, replaced by the cold, damp slap of river water against the shore. A strange, metallic scent of ozone and wet rust now hung in the air where fear and panic had just been a tangible presence. This haunting quiet felt heavier than the previous chaos, a suffocating blanket smothering the town's collective shock. And with this eerie calm came a stark, unsettling realization that settled into the bones of every witness. The Mothman, the creature of shadow and piercing crimson gaze, had vanished as completely as the bridge had fallen. Today, the Memorial Park in Point Pleasant stands quiet, a place of remembrance where the Ohio River flows peacefully nearby. At its center rests a statue of a slender, winged creature, its red eyes seeming to watch over the town with an unsettling permanence. The air here is still, carrying a faint, dry scent of old leaves and distant river mud, a stark contrast to the panic once felt in these streets. Sunlight glints off the statue's metallic surface, but the shadow it casts is long and sharp, a silent echo of the fear that gripped this community. The only sound is the soft, rhythmic lapping of the river against its banks, a sound that now speaks of peace, but once masked other, more terrifying whispers. This is how Point Pleasant remembers. Not with screams, but with this quiet monument, a permanent marker for a mystery that chilled the very soul of the town. The silhouette is seen for just a fraction of a second, a winged shadow superimposed on the doomed Chernobyl reactor complex. The air there carried the faint, metallic tang of ozone, a scent that would soon be overwhelmed by something far worse. A palpable, static charge seemed to cling to the skin, a silent herald of the cataclysm to come. That same dark shape flickers against the pristine glass of the World Trade Center on a clear September morning. Witnesses later spoke of a sudden, inexplicable feeling of dread that tightened their chests in the moments before the first impact. It was the unsettling quiet before the roar, a silence so profound it felt like the world was holding its breath. Then, the shadow falls across the peaceful Fukushima coastline, its form mirrored in the churning, dark water. A cold, salt spray mist carried the distant, grinding sound of shifting tectonic plates, a deep earth whisper of impending ruin. In the dark pine forests surrounding Chernobyl, months before the meltdown, a forester glimpsed a massive silhouette against the twilight sky. The sound was not of wings beating, but of a heavy, wet, leathery rustle, like a tarp being dragged across wet stone. He later described a sudden, acrid smell of ozone and hot metal that made his throat tighten, a scent that had no place among the damp earth and pine. In the humid summer of 2001, a security guard in a lower Manhattan alley saw a shadow that didn't match the buildings, a patch of unnatural darkness that seemed to drink the light from a distant street lamp. From that darkness came a faint, dry scratching, like talons slowly grating against brick, and the air grew thick and stale, as if all the oxygen had been sucked away. Then, two pinpricks of smoldering crimson ignited within the gloom, fixing on him with an intelligence that was utterly alien. In the coastal woods near Fukushima, weeks before the tsunami, a fisherman walking at dawn felt the ground grow unnaturally cold and damp underfoot, a clammy chill that seeped through his boots. A low, resonant hum vibrated in his bones, followed by a wave of nauseating sweetness, the cloying smell of rotting kelp and spoiled fruit that heralded the glimpse of vast, membranous wings vanishing into the morning fog. The screen remains an impenetrable void, a darkness so complete it seems to swallow all light. Then, a sound emerges from the blackness, the slow, deliberate beat of immense wings, each flap carrying the weight of something ancient. The air in the room feels thick and heavy, charged with a sharp, metallic tang like the smell of ozone after a lightning strike. Was it a monster? A creature of claw and wing that stalked Point Pleasant, its presence a physical terror that left the skin clammy and the throat tight? Or was its true horror not in its form, but in its purpose? A feeling of profound, gut-wrenching dread that this thing was not random, but a sign, a harbinger. A word that carries the cold, sickening touch of a fate already written, its arrival whispered on a wind that smells of damp earth and decay. This living alarm system for catastrophe wasn't just a myth tied to one location. The Silver Bridge collapse wasn't its finale. It was merely a chapter in a much longer, more terrifying story. It simply moved on, a spectral harbinger drifting through time and space, leaving its warnings in the scent of ozone before disaster strikes. Now, it watches from the shadows, its presence announced by the sticky, damp chill that clings to the air. Listen closely, and you might hear the faint scratching of claws on pavement, a sound that freezes the breath in your lungs. And in that final, haunting image, the statue of the Mothman, its red eyes catching the moonlight, a primal dread takes hold. This isn't just a monument. It's a reminder that the warning still echoes in the silence between heartbeats. The air grows heavy with the iron tang of impending doom, as if the very atmosphere knows what's coming next. The camera pulls back, revealing it's not the statue we're looking at, but a real, shadowy figure perched on a rooftop above the town. Its eyes glowed briefly with an unnatural, sulfurous light, cutting through the gloom like twin embers. Look to the skies, and ask yourself, what is it warning us about next? A metallic tang, like ozone and rust, suddenly taints the air, making every breath feel thin and sharp. Then, the piercing metallic screech tears through the night one last time, a sound like grinding steel and shattered glass. It cuts abruptly to a vacuum of silence, so complete it feels like pressure building in the ears.